If Predator is everything that is good about blockbuster action films of the 1980s, Prey is all that is right with blockbuster action cinema of the 2010s and early 2020s. After a fair few controversially received sequels, and whatever it is you like to call that thing that released in 2018, Prey faces the challenge of making what might be an impossible sequel. The only franchise that has proved more difficult to succeed in the modern era is the other sci-fi action horror blend starring Arnold Schwarzenegger of the 1980s, Terminator. But Prey succeeds, and pretty much nails the landing. It feels perfectly like what Predator would be if it was made today. It draws clear inspiration from and follows in the footsteps of the original without ever being a complete rehash that feels creatively bankrupt. It brings enough new to the table to provide ample curiosity, suspense, investment, and thrills for its snappy runtime. And it manages to do all of this without being necessarily complex or some film rife with levels of deeper meaning and symbolism. As far as writing goes, things are pretty straightforward. The film primarily follows a Comanche girl, Naru, who is sort of coming into adulthood in her tribe. With this change comes a time for her to set herself into a role in the community. She is pushed towards being more of a supportive matriarchal figure, potentially devoting herself to medicine and caring for the tribe with her talents for healing. However, she makes it plainly apparent that she would rather devote her efforts to hunting. Something she clearly spends time working at, and something she seeks to prove herself not only capable of, but just as skilled as her peers at. And Naru struggles with this for much of the film, but it doesn't stop her. She gets back up, she reties her bowstring, and she keeps fighting against the odds. Not just to prove her potential to her brother or her mother or her entire tribe, but also to herself. It's a pretty minimalist arc for Naru, our protagonist, one that's probably been filmed thousands of times across the history of cinema, but because it's executed well in both the writing by Patrick Olson and the performance from Amber Midthunder, it works really well. In terms of the plot, it's not much more complex than our main character's arc. While Comanche peoples are out hunting, surviving, our titular predator shows up and starts searching the Great Plains for the most dangerous game. There's a marvelous anticipation that slowly builds as this invisible threat begins to one by one dismantle every piece of the food chain that it sees. It moves its way up the ladder until the only target left for this alien to pursue is the humans who still aren't even aware that they're being hunted. This bare-bones plot is executed to a T. It draws out the tension, the suspense of that predator versus human conflict as long as it can, showing you just how impossible the odds are going to be for Naru and her allies. And then, once the hunt is fully on, once Naru is in the tri-tip sights of the predator, it's a non-stop, adrenaline-fueled race to the finish. There's superb action scene after superb action scene, edge-of-your-seat tension, and it really feels like anyone could get turned into a fine red mist at a moment's notice. And this, to me, was one of the most impressive achievements of Prey. I've mentioned a fair few times on this channel that one of the scariest things that exists across all of the horror genre is just the unknown. The idea that whatever our own brains can conjure up will always be infinitely more terrifying than the entity that is actually waiting around that bend in the hall, or is actually sitting in the dark corner of the room. So, Patrick Olson and Dan Trachtenberg were up against pretty tough odds when their big, scary monster was something that's been a pop culture icon for the better part of 4 decades. Yet, they pulled it off. They did this through relying more on tension and thrills, edge-of-your-seat anticipation, than the typical dread and slow, methodically torturous reveals of the usual horror films. They learned this probably from James Cameron and his perfect formula for sequels to somewhat scary horror movies made in the 1980s. Just give them more action. Swap that dread out for excitement. And believe me when I say that more action was given. Not only does the Predator get to shine with all the benefits and abilities of modern technology put to their full use, but it looks magnificent doing so. It was difficult to tell if the awe I was feeling as this hulking alien mowed down hunters by the handful was coming from being shocked by the brutality of it all, or from being amazed at how well it was filmed. As action has moved away from the jump cut nausea of the Jason Bourne late 2000s era, films like John Wick have had a huge influence on how modern movies film their action set pieces. Things like longer takes and wider angles and more understandable and comprehensive, clear choreography have fallen into favor, and I believe most films are all the better for it. One of these films in particular is Prey. I mean, I didn't think there would be anything cooler than a predator getting into a fistfight with a grizzly bear. And then, 10 minutes later, the predator is having a duel with a Comanche hunting group, using their own weapons against them. And then 20 minutes after that, the Predator is massacring everyone in sight in the coolest looking ashen forest I've seen on that side of the Mississippi. And these stellar action sequences are not just limited to the time we spend with the Predator either. It is not some sort of crutch that the film needs to rely on. Two standout scenes that I won't spoil are focused solely on our protagonist Naru and her combat capabilities. The first is intense, frenetically shot, and has a very personal feel to it with a constant growing tension. The second is an amazing one-shot that highlights how much Naru has grown and developed over the course of the film when she's faced with this direct adversity. The one-take action scene she gets in the second half of this movie is really impressive to watch from a technical standpoint, both for its action and for the filmmaking that clearly went into it. It was just precisely planned and executed perfectly. The visual language of Prey is very cohesive, and this is a film that has a clear, naturalistic identity to it. It's a blockbuster movie that feels and looks like it costs millions of dollars, and that is a good thing. Give me some eye candy if you're going to spend tens of millions of dollars on an action movie. Don't make me stare at two actors phoning it in front of a green screen for 2 hours because you were too cheap to fly to somewhere that wasn't a soundstage in Atlanta. Use your resources creatively, whether that means shooting something that feels like it's got massive scope, or simply using the camouflage VFX of the Predator in super creative ways throughout the film. The landscape of the Great Plains is captured beautifully throughout Prey. Even the establishing shots get you to appreciate the beauty of this environment that this thrill ride is taking place in. The tangibility of everything around Naru and the other Comanche tribe members just makes things feel that much more visceral when our alien foe begins to tear them apart limb from limb. That typical disconnect you might feel during a normal blockbuster because everything just looks artificial and feels rubbery is nowhere to be found in Prey. The use of lighting in this film was also much more dynamic than the typical blockbuster. Even observing the differences between shots of nighttime where there's no source of light versus shots where Naru or another hunter might be carrying a torch is super interesting. This film probably has the coolest use of glow-in-the-dark effects I've seen in the past decade, actually. I mean, that climax battle, the big showdown, and the use of the glowing stuff in that is just chef's kiss. It provides an amazing contrast to the shadows and shapes of the forest that envelop the entire battle. Even the soundtrack itself feels intense, either accenting the emotions of a particular scene really well, or just being a standout piece of music during the end credits. Compare this to my last review, where I didn't even remember if there was a soundtrack in the movie, and yeah. So, do I have a point here? Other than my concentrated effort to try to get you to give Prey a chance, now streaming on Hulu, I do actually. I'm glad you asked. My point is that Prey was immensely enjoyable and felt like a complete, finished piece of art. And it gave me all of that without being particularly revolutionary in one way or another. I mean, yes, I would like to give credit to this film for being an amazing source of indigenous Native American representation. Also for apparently creating a woman protagonist that does not immediately cause Republican neckbeards to spontaneously combust in anger about going woke and going broke or something stupid like that. Actually, maybe I spoke too soon on that. But anyway, my point is that the narrative and the characters of Prey are nothing particularly extraordinary or revolutionary. Yet, they are engaging, endearing, and impactful. Not every film needs to reinvent the wheel to earn praise. But what it does have to do is at least make an effort. And Prey did more than just try. It executed on a clear and cohesive vision that provided a unified, streamlined experience for every viewer. A vision that you could understand and appreciate because it was constructed with care by everyone involved, and everyone involved was put in a position to put their best foot forward. So, with all that said, Prey is my ideal version of a franchise film. Give me more Prey. Give me more Mission Impossible Fallout. Give me more movies that spend their money immersing me in a spectacle that I want to see and experience on the biggest screen possible, and one that I am happy to have spent $15 supporting. For my final rating, I give Prey a 4 out of 5 stars. Perhaps a bit generous, but I can't think of much in this movie that I didn't like. Give it a chance, even if you think it may not be your cup of tea. I mean, come on, look at this. Until next time, where I might be reviewing the Bob's Burgers movie. Or something else, actually. I don't know.